The morning I died, England wept for a duke lost at sea. The morning I returned, I stood outside my own front gates and watched a stranger wear my wife's face. Not literally, of course. The woman standing on the steps of Ashford Hall, dressed in the blue silk I once gifted my Duchess for our anniversary, was not Eleanor. She was younger, colder-eyed, and utterly unaware that the real Duchess of Ashford was 3 feet away from her, dressed as a governess, carrying another woman's child by the hand. I had been gone 18 months. Shipwrecked off the coast of Portugal, nursed back from fever by fishermen who spoke no English, unable to send word home for the better part of a year. I had imagined, during the worst of those nights, exactly one thing keeping me alive, Eleanor's face when I walked back through our door. I had not imagined this. I had not imagined that my solicitors would declare our marriage annulled in my absence. That my wife would vanish from every record of the Ashford estate. That my cousin, Lord Pembroke, would install some other woman in her place, a woman who believed, as far as I could tell, that she had married into fortune honestly. She did not know what she had inherited. She had not stolen my wife's title. She had stolen my wife's nightmare, a house built on forged signatures, a fortune bleeding out through Pembroke's hands, and a truth so carefully buried that even the impostor Duchess would eventually become its victim. I watched Eleanor lower her eyes as the false Duchess passed her on the steps, invisible in her own home. I did not reveal myself. Not yet. First, I needed to understand exactly how deep the lie went. 3 days earlier, in a Bristol dockside tavern, I had made the decision that would define everything that followed: I would not announce my survival. Not immediately. Not until I understood what I was walking back into. A sailor from my rescue ship had recognized me, or nearly had, squinting at my sun-weathered face and asking if I wasn't that Ashford lord who went down off Lisbon. I told him he was mistaken. I gave a false name. Mr. Grant, a merchant recently returned from the Portuguese trade. It was the first lie I told in my new life, and it would not be the last. I traveled to Yorkshire under that name, arriving at the edge of my own estate with nothing but a small bag and 18 months of unanswered questions. My first stop was not the manor house. It was the village churchyard, where I stood before a headstone bearing my own name, dates carved with false finality, and felt something in my chest go very still. Beloved husband of Eleanor, Duchess of Ashford. Except the parish register, when I paid the clerk a discreet sum to examine it, told a different story. My marriage to Eleanor had been struck through. Annotated. Annulled by mutual consent, witnessed by Lord Pembroke, March 4th. A date 11 months into my disappearance, when I was half dead in a Portuguese fishing village, and Eleanor, I would have staked my life on this, would never have consented to any such thing. I asked the clerk who had brought the annulment papers for filing. Lord Pembroke's man, sir. And the new Duchess signed alongside him, as I recall. Sweet young lady. Married the Duke that same summer. Married the Duke. Married me, apparently, to a woman I had never in my life met. I did not correct him. I thanked him for his time and walked the 2 miles to Ashford Hall in the fading light, rehearsing nothing, because there was nothing yet to rehearse. I needed proof before I needed confrontation. Pembroke had always been ambitious in the quiet, patient way of men who wait years to make their move. If he had gone this far, forging an annulment, installing an impostor bride, erasing Eleanor from her own life, he would not be undone by a grieving widower's outrage. He would need to be undone by evidence. It was at the gates that I saw her. Eleanor, thinner than I remembered, in a plain grey dress, walking 2 steps behind a child who was not hers, addressed by a passing footman as Miss Grey. She did not look up. She did not see me. I had come home to find my wife a ghost in her own house, and a stranger wearing her name. I took a room above the village inn under my false name, Mr. Grant, and spent the next 4 days learning the shape of the lie before I tried to break it. The impostor Duchess was called Miss Amelia Foxworth before her marriage. This much I gathered from the innkeeper's wife, who was fond of gossip and fonder still of a paying stranger who let her talk. Amelia had come from a modest family in Norfolk, orphaned young, raised by a distant aunt. She had met, the Duke of Ashford, Pembroke, now understood, must have presented himself or an accomplice under some manner of deception, at a subscription ball in London the previous winter. A whirlwind courtship. A quiet wedding at Ashford Hall itself, with Lord Pembroke standing as the family's blessing in the absent Duke's stead. She believed, entirely, that she was my wife. That detail unsettled me more than Pembroke's scheming ever could. Whatever else Amelia Foxworth was, she did not appear to be a willing conspirator. She was a young woman who had been sold a fortune and a title, and had no notion that the man she called husband in his letters, for Pembroke apparently corresponded with her under my name, using some manner of forged hand, did not exist at all in the form she imagined. I needed to see Eleanor. Not as the Duke, not yet, as Mr. Grant, a stranger seeking employment information, nothing more. I found her on the 5th day in the walled garden behind the east wing, seated on a bench while the child she minded chased a spaniel across the grass. She had aged in ways that had nothing to do with years, a wariness around the eyes, a stillness in how she held herself, like a woman who had trained herself not to be noticed. "Miss Gray," I said, using the name I'd heard the footman give her. "Might I trouble you for directions to the estate office?" She looked up, and for one unbearable second I thought she recognized me. Then the moment passed, and I understood, she had spent 18 months learning I was dead. A bearded stranger in traveling clothes was not going to undo that in an instant. She gave me clear, polite directions and returned her attention to the child. I walked away with my pulse hammering and my resolve, if anything, sharpened. Eleanor did not know me. Which meant Eleanor was safe from suspicion, for now, and so was I. But I could not simply reveal myself to her in a garden and hope for the best. If Pembroke discovered I lived before I had proof of his forgery, he would have time to destroy the annulment records, silence the clerk, perhaps worse. I thought of Clara Hastings, a solicitor Eleanor's family had once trusted, and resolved to find her before I found my wife again. Clara Hastings kept chambers above a bookseller's in the nearby market town, and when I gave my false name at her door, she looked at me for a long moment before saying, quietly, "You may as well sit down, Your Grace." I went very still. "You know me. I buried you 18 months ago. I attended the memorial. I have spent every week since then reading Ashford estate filings that make no sense, and I recognize a man's bearing even under a beard and borrowed coat." She closed the door behind me and drew the curtain. I have been waiting for someone to walk through that door and confirm what I already suspected. I did not expect it to be you. That was the moment everything changed. Clara laid out, over the next hour, everything her quiet investigation had uncovered. The annulment papers bore Eleanor's signature, but Clara had compared it against a dozen authentic letters and found the forgery clumsy under close examination, the loops of the E too wide, the pressure inconsistent. The witness signature belonged to Lord Pembroke's steward, a man who had since been quietly pensioned off to a cottage in Cumberland, well away from anyone who might question him. More damning still, in the 18 months of my absence, 3 separate mortgages had been taken against Ashford lands, the funds routed through an account Clara had traced, with considerable difficulty, back to Lord Pembroke's personal creditors in London. He was not merely stealing a title. He was bleeding the estate dry through debts he had no legal right to incur, using a forged annulment and an unwitting bride as cover for it all. "Amelia Foxworth signed nothing knowingly fraudulent," Clara said. "I believe she thinks herself legally your wife. I believe she has no idea the money passing through this house is disappearing into Pembroke's pockets. Then she is as much a victim of this as Eleanor. More, perhaps. Eleanor at least knows what was taken from her. Amelia doesn't yet know what she's inherited isn't a fortune at all. It's a debt with her name now attached to it, and when it collapses, and it will collapse, within the year, at the rate Pembroke is borrowing, she will be the one left facing creditors and scandal. Pembroke will simply vanish." I asked Clara the question that had been sitting in my chest since the churchyard. "Does Eleanor know any of this?" "Eleanor knows she was cast out with nothing, told her marriage was dissolved by papers she never signed, and given a governess's wages to survive on in the very house she once ran as its mistress. Whether she knows the full architecture of Pembroke's scheme, I cannot say. She has been too careful, too afraid, to ask questions that might see her dismissed from the one position keeping a roof over her head. I thought of Eleanor in the garden, unrecognizing, careful, quiet. I thought of Amelia Foxworth in blue silk on the front steps, wearing a name that was never truly hers to wear. Then it's time, I said, that both of them learned the truth. Clara insisted on caution, and she was right to. Proof was not yet complete enough to bring before a magistrate, and Pembroke was not a man who would surrender quietly. We needed the original annulment filing, the one submitted to the ecclesiastical court, compared directly against Eleanor's true hand, with a witness of standing present to confirm the forgery beyond doubt. That meant returning to Ashford Hall. That meant Eleanor. I sent word through Clara rather than risk approaching her myself again, a note, unsigned, asking only that Miss Grey meet a friend of the family in the walled garden at dusk, on a matter concerning her true name. It was a risk. If it reached the wrong hands, if Pembroke's household staff intercepted it, everything Clara and I had built would collapse before it began. Eleanor came. I watched her walk the garden path in the fading light, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill, uncertain and clearly bracing herself for disappointment. When I stepped from behind the yew hedge and removed my hat, she stopped as though the ground itself had shifted beneath her. "No," she said. "Just that." "No, you're alive," I said. "Eleanor. It's me. I will not pretend the reunion was gentle." She did not run to me. She stood frozen for the space of several long breaths, and then she struck my chest with the flat of her hand, once, hard, and said, in a voice cracked down the middle, 18 months. 18 months I mourned you, and they took everything the moment I was too broken to fight them. I know. You don't know. You weren't here when they told me the marriage never existed. When they put another woman in my house, in my clothes, sleeping in my rooms. When they made me a governess in my own home because I had nowhere else to go and no name left to go there with. I let her say all of it. I had imagined, on those Portuguese nights, 100 versions of coming home, and none of them had prepared me for this, for standing in my own garden while my wife wept with fury and grief in equal measure, for a homecoming that felt less like reunion than reckoning. Pembroke did this, I said, when she had quieted enough to hear it. The annulment is forged. Clara Hastings has proof, or nearly does. But we need more before we move against him, and until we do, he cannot know I'm alive. Eleanor wiped her face with the back of her hand, and something in her posture steadied, the old iron returning to her spine. Then tell me what you need from me. I have spent a year and a half invisible in this house. I know every hour Pembroke keeps, every room he thinks no one watches him enter. For the first time since Lisbon, I let myself believe we might actually win this. It fell apart 4 days later. Eleanor had been slipping into the estate office at night, when the household slept, searching for the original ledgers Clara needed, the ones showing the mortgages taken against Ashford land during my absence. She found them on the third night, hidden behind a false panel in Pembroke's desk, exactly where his steward's old habits had suggested they might be. She should never have gone a fourth time. But one ledger was missing a signature page, and without it, Clara warned, the paper trail back to Pembroke's creditors would remain circumstantial. Pembroke caught her with her hand still in the drawer. I learned of it the following morning, from a white-faced Clara who arrived at my inn room before dawn. Eleanor had been dismissed from her position on the spot, accused of theft, and, worse, Pembroke had wasted no time. He'd sent word to the local magistrate that his household governess, a Miss Grey, of uncertain character, had been caught stealing private family papers, and he intended to press charges before the week was out. He doesn't know who she really is, Clara said. But it doesn't matter. If she's convicted of theft, her word means nothing afterward, whoever she claims to be. He's found a way to silence her without ever needing to know the truth of what she found. I went to find Eleanor at the small rooming house where she'd taken shelter, and found her packing the little she owned into a single case, her hands shaking too badly to fold the fabric properly. "I have nothing," she said, without looking up. "No name, no position, no proof that will hold up against a lord's word over a dismissed governess's. If I go before that magistrate, Eleanor, do you understand, I go before him as no one at all. Miss Grey has no history to defend her. And you cannot stand as my husband to vouch for me, because the moment you do, Pembroke knows you're alive, and he will bury every scrap of evidence Clara has gathered before nightfall." She was right, and the knowledge of it sat like stone in my chest. To save her, I would have to reveal myself, and in revealing myself, hand Pembroke exactly the warning he needed to destroy what remained of our case. "There has to be another way," I said, though in that moment I could not find it. "Perhaps there isn't." Eleanor closed the case and finally looked at me, her eyes dry now, hollowed by exhaustion rather than tears. "Perhaps this is simply what he wanted from the start, to make certain that even if the truth surfaced someday, there would be no one left standing who could be believed." Outside, I could hear the church bell tolling the hour. The magistrate's hearing had been set for the following morning. We had one night left, and no evidence strong enough to survive it. Clara arrived that night with the missing signature page, found, at last, tucked inside the steward's old correspondence in Cumberland, secured just hours before the hearing. At dawn, I walked into the magistrate's court not as Mr. Grant, but as the Duke of Ashford, alive and furious, with forged annulment papers and mortgage fraud laid bare before the room. Pembroke's face, when he understood, told its own confession. He was arrested before noon. Amelia Foxworth, weeping with shock rather than guilt, was released from a marriage that had never legally existed and quietly returned to Norfolk, wiser and free of debts that were never truly hers. Eleanor stood beside me on the steps of Ashford Hall that afternoon, wearing her own name again at last, and I understood that everything I had feared losing at sea, I had finally, fully come home to. "What would you have done in her place?"